Is this a subjective view of risk of me based on my upbringing, based on what I know versus what the world knows?
Welcome to Everyday Leadership, a podcast where I interview leaders not defined by position or title. Everyday people who lead their lives in extraordinary ways. And on this podcast, they share their stories, their life lessons, and practical tools in the hope that it will inspire everyday people like you and me to realize we are everyday leaders. My guest today is a data guru who's helped businesses grow and thrive during the pandemic. Maz is the founder of Translate Culture. And we find out how he got into data analytics, why embracing doing the boring stuff is so important, as well as discussing a beginner's mindset, fatherhood, and so much more. Let's jump into the episode. Today I have the pleasure of talking to my brother from another mother, Masibu Manima. How are you doing, my bro?
I'm good, thanks, bro. How you doing?
I am doing well. Looking forward to this interview. So for those of you who don't know, Maz is a data guru, the guy who operates behind the scenes of a lot of the well-known successful brands in the UK with his company Translate Culture. Maz, you mind just sharing what is Translate Culture?
Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me. I'm sure it's been a pleasure kind of watching you build this platform, and just want to say thank you for having me. My name is Maz, or Masibu Manima, founder of Translate Culture. I don't call myself a CEO yet, which is just something that I always like to start with. But so founder of Translate Culture, we're essentially a data marketing agency. We work with primarily consumer brands, and what we do for them is help them find and retain customers. So most of our clients are e-commerce businesses, predominantly Black-owned businesses, which are, as you kind of go through this interview, you find out how that sort of came about. But so we help e-commerce businesses basically using platforms such as Facebook, Google, YouTube, ad platforms to find their customers and convey their offering and get those customers get those prospects to become customers. And then we help them with the strategy on how they retain those customers and scale and find more customers like that. So we started off as a paid media agency initially. So we were just doing ads, as I mentioned. But we started to expand a bit more into sort of data strategy, marketing strategy. We've taken some roles within some organizations where we act as an extension of their marketing team and their data team. Actually going through some branding change ourselves, as in we're still going to be called Translate Culture, but I guess our tagline has changed to we take luck out of the equation. And what we mean by that is the way we use data to make sure that some of the decisions that we're making or some of the results that we're seeing, should I say, isn't purely out of luck. It's actually down to some measurable actions and strategies.
You released an article explaining how you've helped Black founders generate 6 figures in online sales since the first lockdown, which backs up your statement that you just talked around taking luck out of the equation. I'm curious to understand, how have you managed to keep your clients and generate great returns at a time when there was a lot of fear, anxiety, and you would think that ad spend will be an area that other businesses naturally would cut spending on?
Yeah, so which goes back to the earlier point I mentioned. So most of the businesses we work with are Black-owned businesses, primarily because, take a step back, the way I kind of got into building Translate Culture was off the back of me spending, years just helping my friends' businesses. So whenever somebody had a digital business or wanted to launch something online, I was usually the go-to person within my community. And obviously I was working in sort of like corporate careers and stuff. I always had a few side hustles, which I'm sure we'll probably discuss through this conversation. But as I built that reputation, people will reach out or to help them with Facebook ads or track their analytics and all that type of stuff. And then it came to the point where a few people decided they were going to pay for my services. And I was doing it for free at the time because I wasn't really thinking about building a company at that stage. But, a few of my friends' businesses started to take off and they needed to grow pretty quickly. So we agreed a fee for me to run their ads for them. Next thing I know, within a year of doing that, I ended up having about 6 or 7 clients. And I just made the decision then to say, look, I'm going to step away from my career and go full time on this. And at that time, I probably was earning about, I would say, probably half of what I was earning in my career, if not less than that, I think. But I just took the leap of faith to kind of go and just grow the company. And it just so happened I left, I think I went full time in September. 6 months later, obviously, 4 to 6 months later, we've obviously had COVID. And then come March, we had a lockdown. I think up to that point, I had about six to 8 clients. And I just made it my mission to make sure, first and foremost, that none of my clients went out of business, especially as a majority of them were Black-owned businesses. And we were already seeing some of the impact that COVID was having within our community, within ethnic minority communities. So I just decided to double down and went beyond just the paid ads. I started reaching out to my clients and saying, look, how else can I be of any help? A few of them took my offer, and I ended up basically offering them wider strategic advice on, how they can pivot the business, how they can test out new audiences. And it just so happened at that time, because the approach that we take to advertising or the approach we take to marketing is very, we follow a systematic approach and we're always learning. When there was a lockdown, a lot of businesses started cutting back on their ads, but we had so much learning and we knew who our audiences were for most of our clients that we were actually able to double down like confidently, which is brilliant on these platforms, because if there's less people advertising, then it means you spend less to reach more people. And it just so happened that I would say probably, if not all my clients had their best sort of months during that period. And I think it was just down to the fact that we doubled down, and it gave everybody the opportunity to really start to focus on what matters. And that's really understanding your customers and being able to communicate to them. And especially at a time when everybody's at home. So it was just a really good case study to have. And for us, that's why we changed our tagline to taking luck out of the equation, because a lot of it was very data driven and testing everything that we were pushing live.
Wow. How did you get into data?
Randomly, actually. Obviously, you've known me for a few years, but I think when I went to uni, to actually study finance. I think my whole thing has always been, I've always had a simple theory for things. Like, as long as I can justify my decision within myself, I'm happy. Like, I went to uni to do finance. My rationale was because that's where the money is. The money's in the bank. So I'm going to work. I wanted to work in the bank because that's where the money was. So when you need to do finance, first couple of weeks, obviously when you're in university, you get to test out other courses. And I did marketing and like an introduction to marketing. And I thought, actually, you know what, this is a better fit. Then I switched my course to business studies, specialized in marketing. Did that for 3 years. Obviously, I had industrial placement, got a grad scheme. And then I went into work for a car company as part of the grad scheme and learned a lot through there, just how to work in a corporation and everything. I always wanted to work in marketing communications. Obviously, there was a lot of opportunities there. So I ended up actually working more in a kind of marketing and sales role, which led to a lot of number crunching. And at the time, when you're young, you're thinking, oh, this is boring. I want to do the exciting things. I want to work on the TV ad campaign. I want to work on the digital display thing that we're doing that everybody's going to see, right? But the work I was doing, nobody was seeing, because it's kind of just internal, like reporting this worked or this didn't work. But I just developed a really good, I guess, understanding of like just numbers and like Excel, like just basic sort of data analysis skills. And at the same time, I had a few startups with a few of my friends. So I had one called Mixtape Madness, which was a UK streaming platform with like 3 or 4 of my friends. And there was Brothers with No Game, which was like a blog that we had at the time, later turned into a YouTube channel and then became essentially a TV series. But at that time, obviously I'm juggling all of these things, juggling a career and 2 other startups. It just came to the point where I just thought to myself, I'm going to double down on this data thing. And it goes back to this taking luck out of the equation, especially when you have a number of other founders. It's hard to make a decision because there's 4 or 5 different opinions, right? And my approach was like, I'm just gonna follow the data. I can't say whether I'm right or wrong. If we can't agree, what does the numbers say? And then, I just started doubling down on that because I saw that in the corporate world. I saw that whenever there was a crunch decision-making thing, we tended to lean to the numbers. And the numbers could be wrong after a while, but at least you have something that is exclusive from our opinions. And then, just started seeing results in that sense. And then I started to double down on that. Taught myself Google Analytics, just taught myself all of these different tools. And then from that job, I moved to the British Medical Journal, where I became a CRM analyst, essentially started my career again at the bottom of this, almost like a new career. So I moved away from marketing and sales down to the bottom of the data ladder. And then within 5 years in that company, I was promoted 3 times. And I left there as a senior CRM analyst. And I was also a data product manager. How did I get into it? Literally just self-awareness, and whenever I learn something that I find interesting, I just go down the rabbit hole and double down. And I think data, as you probably know, is the future, isn't it?
There are a number of great points you just touched on, which I really want to emphasize, not just gloss over. So number one, doing the boring stuff. So we live in a culture that idolizes like doing the glamorous, sexy, exciting things. A lot of people, myself included, I want to avoid doing the boring stuff. Yeah, as you just shared, that was very, very foundational for you. And you just really touched on why it's so important for us to embrace the boring. And number two, you also talked about being willing to start again. So when you moved across to BMJ, you had that beginner's mindset. You're willing to reinvent yourself in doing something different. But how did you develop that level of self-awareness, allowing you to see things from a different perspective and approach life the way that you have done?
Good question. I think it's part of my personality. I'm happy to be wrong in the context of being stronger and or better. In the pursuit of growth is probably the best way to do it. I think whenever I was young, I always questioned things. And I felt like there's something humbling about that, because then you almost start with the mindset that you don't know. It's like you only know what you know, right? And I've learned over the years, actually having that sort of curious sort of beginner's mindset has actually helped me most of the time. And the time when it doesn't help you, you can be, if you're too much into the beginner's mindset, you may actually not be aware of what you do know. And you've known me for years, and I think a lot of people have always been aware of my potential, probably more so than I had, right? And there's probably times when I've over-indexed or overworked on things, like gone down the rabbit hole for too long. But I still think with everything you do, you have to do the work, especially as a founder. I did everything. Like this business for the first, say, 10 months or 12 months even, it was just me. So I did the campaigns, I did the pitch, I did the data analysis, I did the financing, I did everything. And I think why this business is probably arguably one of the most successful businesses that I've been involved in terms of its trajectory has been down to that. It has been down to the fact that I didn't overthink a lot of things. I didn't think about automation first, right? I didn't think about building a big team and then having people do loads of things. I just thought, let me do the dirty work first. And then as I learn, I then optimize. And I think to answer your question, where that comes from, I don't know, I think it's a personality thing, but also a lot of people that I look up to in business, in sport, always have a beginner's mindset. So for example, like one of my favorite sports people is LeBron James. He's been the best basketball player in the world for probably the last 10 years. But everyone that's in his team will tell you he's probably one of the most hardworking people in that team. We see the same with Cristiano Ronaldo. You see the same with the likes of Jay-Z. And you see it the same with the likes of a lot of business people, right? It's just this thing where you don't want to leave it to chance. You almost want to do the work and start over again. It's almost like you climb the top of one mountain. You need to just keep climbing. There's always another mountain. And I think that makes life worthwhile as well, to know that there's so much more that I'm going to need to learn. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers your question.
No, it definitely does. And one thing you touched on earlier on was about the fact that you were adding value to your friends and others before this even became a business.
Mm-hmm.
How did people know to come to you to be the go-to guy around data?
Mm-hmm.
And then how did you also build the trust with those founders that you mentioned during COVID, for them to be like, I'm going to trust Maz to spend money in this, and I know I'm going to get a return in this, during a period where you're going through a pandemic, so they'd be worried?
Mm-hmm. Very good question. I think when I think about, well, actually, I think about when I first started to develop that reputation, it's because from early, I was always trying something. Like I was quite early on this sort of digital marketing, sort of building your own business. I remember when I was in uni, I was just trying different ideas. And it's funny when you see things like Huffington Post, like I was trying to do something like that, but for our community, if you remember, right? P Bleep with Leon and everyone, which was kind of like user generated content. And it's funny because you do these things, you always get those moments, you're like, oh, I thought of that, but it doesn't really matter. It's down to execution. So I had all these things that I was doing. But what I didn't realize, even though these things didn't take off and there might have been failure or seen as failure at that stage, I was picking up like tacit knowledge, stuff that I probably wasn't even aware that I was aware of until I started to apply some of that knowledge in the corporate world and vice versa. And I saw the value of that because every year people be making introductions to different people. And then I realized, oh gosh, like I do know a lot more than I thought I did. And that's how it happened. So from P Bleeped, which was a blog which me and Leon created, and then later when Leon had the idea for Brothers No Game, he obviously asked me to be involved because there was a track record there of when I tried to get him to work on P Bleep. So P Bleep was my idea, Leon jumped on it. Brothers No Game was Leon's idea. Because of that working relationship, I jumped on it. Obviously through P Bleep, most of my friends were where we grew up. So when Andy and Eddie came up with Mixtape Madness, I was like, hey, they were like, speak to Maz. He's the guy that worked on this project. So I ended up being invited to different startups because of that track record and all of those 2-3 years of me trying things and failing, but taking the learnings from it. And then years down the line, when my wife started her store, helped her out. And then through that, people then discovered me. So it goes back to just doing the work. There's no better currency than your reputation. Like there's nothing better than being known for something very specific, especially if it's something that's in demand, right? And for me, and what kind of helped is being in a career meant that I didn't need to chase the money. It meant that I can just do it because I enjoyed it. And also it meant that I'm also learning to see that what I'm actually doing here can be applied across the board. And that's what leads to this thing about taking luck out of the equation. Because if you see it happen so many times, it almost becomes formulaic, right? So yeah, so that's how it sort of came about.
You didn't chase the money.
I didn't, bro.
That's a very hard thing to do when you're just coming up, especially coming up from Tottenham and everything that we've seen around us. Mm-hmm. Chasing the money was a regular thing.
And well,
so how did you differentiate, man?
What it is, like I said, I'm quite reflective. And whenever I've chased, it's just weird. I don't know if this is even just random for me or I can't say it for everybody else's life. But whenever I've chased money, whenever I've chased anything, I always feel like I've never really got it. Whereas if I do the work that's required, it then comes. And what I mean by that is I fundamentally believe business is here to serve people. We're here to solve problems, right? And I learned that strongly probably about 4 years ago when I started to look at the businesses that I worked on that failed and the businesses I worked on that hadn't failed, that caught traction. And one of the key differences that I could identify was whenever we started a business saying there's this problem and this is what we're solving, even though we didn't articulate it like that, right? Then they seemed to do really well. When it was like, look, I need to make money and I've got this idea and it's going to just make me money. Everybody comes up with those eureka moments where you think, oh my gosh, if this came out, this app that does this, da-da-da. And I went through that. I had LDN slang, which was like an app which was meant to translate London slang, right? That's a dope idea, but let's be honest, like I was only really doing that because it was scratching my own itch. That's one. But also apps were taking off at that time. There was loads of articles of people who started an app and then they made $1 million. So I felt like there was a little bit of an influence there because it didn't need to be an app. I could have just done a video on YouTube or whatever, explaining there's so many different ways to solve that problem if it was even a problem on its own. So when I start measuring that to, let's say, Brothers No Game, which was a blog, the problem we're solving was particularly men from our community weren't openly talking about issues around finances, issues around relationships, issues around careers. That's a problem we're solving. And there was no money to that. It was just, wouldn't it be dope if the conversations we're having in our living rooms was articulated in a blog or a thing, right? And a few years later, that turns into a TV production company. Mixtape Madness, the same thing. Wouldn't it be great if there was a Dat Piff, which is the American version of Mixtape Madness, where you can stream mixtapes from urban artists? And it's, oh yeah, wouldn't that be dope, right? And then you build it. And then I think about translate cultures. Well, I know that for me, I have a theory that I think a direct to consumer, which is obviously being able to sell directly to people online, is going to be one of the biggest shifts in terms of helping just working class people being able to build their own businesses, right? If you've got an idea, whether it's you're selling something or if it's some piece of art, like you can do it online now. And I knew that was gonna come. Coupling that with the fact that the communities which I come from, a lot of people want to start businesses. They have talent, but they just don't know how to reach their audiences. It just made sense, the fact that I've got 10 years experience of being able to reach audiences, to provide it as a service, right? Some people come to me and say, oh, why don't you have your own e-commerce store? I'm like, well, my wife's already got one. And I know how stressful it is to have an e-commerce store. If you don't want that stress, but I'd rather work for someone like my wife, right? Because there's going to be more people like her who that's their expertise, is building the business and all that kind of stuff. And my expertise is getting that business in front of the right people. And the last few years, I haven't really put too much focus on the financial goal. I put most of my focus on just delivering excellence. And the way I measure success outside of that is the amount of referrals I get. My last 7 clients have come from 2 people, like literally. So one person referred, person A referred person B and C, and then person B referred person D and E, and person E has referred like person F. I don't know my alphabet's correct, but just from 2 people, well, actually from one person, to be fair, from one person there's come 7 clients. But then what that meant is you're not going to recommend someone who isn't of good standard, right? So my company has grown more through referrals than business development, which for me makes me proud that we have our clients as effectively agents. And since then, I've just I've just doubled down on the work and not really focused on the money, if I'm honest. Obviously, I want the money. I love the money. Who doesn't, right? I've got financial ambitions and I've got, things I want to provide for my family and so forth. But I know it's going to come. It just comes from excellence. And that's what I want to focus my time on.
So for someone who has worked in both corporate and now you're a founder, you've got a founder community, do you recommend founders getting corporate experience, or do you go straight into what they're doing?
Very good question. I think it really depends on the individual. I know stories of people who've just gone straight down the entrepreneurial route and smashed it. And I also know people who've gone through the same route that I've gone through and smashed it. So I think it really depends on the individual. I think for me, naturally growing up, I was risk averse for whatever reason. So it meant I had to take that route. And also having to provide for my family and being the eldest, the first person to go to university, coming from an African background, you have that responsibility that I can't just turn around and say to my family, yo, I got this dream. It's a risk, but it's going to be 6 to 9 months where there may not be any income, but when it happens, we're going to be millionaires. You can't pitch that. Like, no one's going to buy that, right? And to be fair, some people do. And there are stories of people from our background that have done it. But just based on my own personality, it felt like I had to set the foundations first and foremost. Why do I advocate this? I would advocate it for someone who's got similar personality to myself, in that, I say advocate. Let's just say what the pros are anyway. You're learning on somebody else's effectively bank account, right? Like, you're getting paid to learn and deliver value. So it's a good test to actually know whether your skill set, as you are right now, is in demand. So the fact that you have a job, it means that at least one person or one company sees value in you, irrespective of the role. Even if you're doing admin, it doesn't matter, because you can start off doing admin for one company and end up building an admin agency, right? You could start in a company working as a cleaner, but that's fine. You may be the best cleaner in that company, but the next thing you might do is you may start a cleaner agency, because you know how to do it from company A, Why don't you just train up the next person to go do it in company B, and then you build a company that way? And you may not even need to leave that company, still do cleaning there. You may move up to a cleaning manager, but then you understand the ins and outs. And I think for me, I don't think it's an either or. It's never been an either or. We've had these conversations for years, right? It's never been an either or. But you tend to have a school of thought of people who are like, oh, you're an employee, you're a slave for the company, you don't own any shares in it. Well, I know people who work in companies who, if we're measuring this by financial success, there's some wealthy people who've just worked their way up and invested their money in shares or pensions and whatever. So it's what you do with the money as well, if we're talking from a financial standpoint. Also fulfillment. Some people don't want to have the stress of waking up every morning and having to figure out where the bills are going to come. So that's the pros, definitely, in terms of working for a company, is you get to learn on somebody else's watch, on somebody else's, I guess, resources. What I advise is you've got to make sure that you pay back that investment, right? And I believe that even on the spiritual realm, that you can't take a job for granted. You almost have to, if somebody's investing in you, you've got to give back twofold, right? You've got to work as if, and maybe it's just a personality thing. I worked in every I'll probably say, well, maybe not every company. My second role, where I got so many promotions, I worked as if I owned that company. I had to, not because of them, but because of myself, because I know what it takes then to build a company. Like I was fortunate because that company was very transparent in terms of the goals and how they trickle down. So I learned so much about how my role was linked into the CEO's objective. So when I become a founder or a CEO, I then know how to structure a team and disseminate key performance indicators and goals. So to answer your question, I think it really depends on your personality. Some people just can't cut the corporate sort of structure and waking up at a certain time. Some people can't cut it. And for me, beginning of my career, I probably was a bit out of sync, but I had to learn it, because if I'm going to try to build a company, then why not learn from somebody else's resources?
So now you're running your own company, you've got staff now. What are you learning as a leader, and how hard have you found it? Or easy have you found it?
Good question. It can be challenging, but it's so rewarding. And I think leadership is an interesting term, because I've always described leadership as almost the opposite as well. Like, to be a leader, you have to be a servant. You know what I mean? Even as a servant, you're leading. It's like when I went to work, me not being late and that's leadership. Like getting yourself up, you have to lead yourself out of bed to go work and earn, whether it's for your family or whatever. Those are attributes of leadership, right? And so now that as I'm moving away from the day-to-days of doing the business, I have to lead in a slightly different way through my actions, first and foremost. Like, people have to see that what I'm telling them is also how I'm living my life. It's tough because, like, I value family over pretty much everything, and myself, obviously my own self-care and everything, like mental health and all that kind of stuff, like well-being, right? Personal well-being and family well-being and people's well-being. But there are times when, like, business is tough. Like, you've got back-to-back pitches and a campaign has gone wrong. And those times it can be tough to show what to also match what you've said, right? But my style of leadership has always been, first and foremost, that making sure that I am very clear in terms of what I expect from people and where we're going as a company, and then just leaving them to do it how they are able to do it within the constraints of our company culture. I didn't like micromanagement, so I don't do it. And I guess the toughest thing about leadership that I found is that you're gonna be accountable, which is fine. I actually don't mind. I've always been accountable, but you also have to be, you have to be prepared for the unexpected, right? Like, you're never gonna take even if you want to take your eye off the ball, it's very hard, because there's gonna be events that are gonna test that vision or that culture that you've kind of said to everyone, and that's the tough part, is actually sometimes missing the mark. But what I love about that is I'm able to just be transparent and say, look, I'm human. Like, I do work till 3 a.m. sometimes, even though I tell people not to. Sometimes I do it, but then my thinking around is, how do I stop doing it? Because the goal is not to work till 3 a.m. But I do understand that sometimes there will be. So that's the tough part. is just like when my actions don't match maybe some of the guiding principles that I'm trying to implement in the company. Although I know those guiding principles work, sometimes I do go astray, and then it's hard having to then recalibrate. But once it's done, like when you've kind of had that conversation with the team and adjusted, it's so rewarding, and I just love seeing visions and cultures coming into fruition. But it's been an up and down journey. But I think my team will be able to say whether I'm doing a good job or not.
How have you gone about creating or being intentional about how you create the culture within TC?
Good question. I think for me, it was just my North Star, or like my goal, is to create a company that is to create my ideal company. Like I've created my ideal job. I've created my ideal company. I've created my ideal lifestyle. Now, like I said, things are going to go out of sync sometimes. But whenever I don't look at that vision, that's when things do go left field. But whenever I go back and look at that vision, look, what kind of company are you trying to create? What kind of family dynamic are you trying to create? What kind of people do you want around you? What kind of results? What kind of customers do you want to work with? What kind of customers you don't want to work with, right? Whenever I go back to that drawing board, it just helps me basically get back on track. So for me, that was the North Star. Like what company would somebody asked a very good question this week in one of the WhatsApp groups. Is that, would you work for the company that you own, knowing that somebody like you is leading it? And I said 100%. And I didn't even think twice, right? Because obviously it might sound biased, and I think most people will probably say the same answer. But this is my dream company. Like I've taken what I don't like about the corporate world and what I don't like about the startup world, and I'm effectively building it now. And that's been the vision. I need a company that I can wake up every morning and feel like I'm doing my life's work. And equally, I want everyone in the company to be the same. So then it means I'm very transparent very early what the company culture is and what we're trying to achieve. So then people can make a decision on whether that's the right company for them or not. That's pretty much it for me.
You're married to Natalie, who is the founder of BESPOKE, BINNY. You've worked with her on her business. How has that been working alongside your partner?
It's been tough. I think it's always difficult. See, my wife's an amazing creative person, and I can be very systematic and sort of data focused and can be quite linear sometimes. So there's obviously those differences. But what I've realized across the years is actually that's what helps both of us work really well together, is that we understand the other person's way of thinking and we try to meet halfway. But that's come like later on. At the beginning, it was like head to head, like I know what I'm doing, I know what you're doing, like kind of thing. We've had some challenges along the way that kind of forced us to be a bit more, I guess, open to the other person's approach. And I think we work really well when it comes to a situation where she understands my strengths and I understand hers, and weaknesses vice versa. Like I understand where to stop and she understands where to stop, and she knows when to ask for help and I know when to ask for, to give my opinion and not to give my opinion. But that was so good because then it meant that the kind of founders that I work with now, or the businesses we work with, we try to have a similar kind of relationship, because I'm in the journey with these brands to also learn and grow. And as I grow, we'll grow together. It's just about being coachable and being open to somebody else's view, and then being honest to say, look, no, I don't think that works, and then do it your way, and then be accountable whether it goes one way or the other. But yeah, it was tough at the beginning. I think we're getting better at it. And we still have challenges where we disagree on certain things. But the good thing is we know we're both on the same ship, as in the intention is good.
What's one of the biggest lessons you've learned then from your marriage?
To this day, my wife said to me, there's a quote, she just said to me, live your truth. And having those honest conversations, as painful as they may be early and often, is super important in a relationship. And equally, when you ask for something from the other person, be happy when you get it, right? That's another very important thing, because especially in a marriage and any relationship, to be honest, but especially marriage, when you ask for something from someone, so most of the time, not the little things, but let's say the big things, right? Somebody loves you, they're gonna go out their way. Like, they're gonna go left and right, like across the world to get it. And then being able to deliver that to you, and then seeing the appreciation and the gratitude, that is generally more rewarding, that I think, in terms of that person then, whenever you ask them for something else, then having the energy to go and do it again, right? So those are the two things for me that I've learned in marriage, is just be transparent, have those tough conversations. You have to have those tough conversations, and have those tough conversations early on in the relationship as well. We did marriage counseling before we got married, which I think was the best decision ever. And to be honest, the marriage counseling had nothing to do with marriage. It was literally like personal therapy, because you don't know who you are. None of us know. We're never going to know who we really are. And at least having some more awareness of it before you go into a relationship with somebody just helps. And along the way, I know we're going to discover parts of us that we don't know. But at least there was a strong foundation at the beginning of, okay, we talk through things. There's going to be times we're off the rails again, but at least we know that as a tool works. If things get tough, we can just sit down and say sorry and be transparent and be vulnerable if need be. So that's it for me. The first part is being transparent, being intentional and saying what you want and how you feel. And then the other person listening to it. But then the second part is when that other person delivers, whether positive or negative, or where they try to deliver towards something, is having some form of gratitude for that effort, because it can get quite challenging if you feel like you're not getting that positive feedback. And I think those two for me have been major lessons, and I'm sure there's more that I'm going to learn along the way.
Vulnerability is always a very interesting subject, so I'm very interested to learn and understand how you managed being vulnerable in your marriage.
But I think better in the last, well, better through marriage. I think obviously having the counseling really helped, but it's also knowing that, look, and that goes back to the point about live your truth. So I didn't delve into that too much, but I guess I could delve into it more in this question. Like, when you live with someone, your wife, your husband, they know everything about you, pretty much, more than anyone else, right? Outside of yourself, you would expect, by the way. So for me, it was almost like my wife was always very aware when I was not being 100%. So she would challenge me on that. And also I can tell when my wife's not happy about something and vice versa, right? But I think that's beautiful though. I think it's almost like a mirror, a constant mirror. And it's the worst when you're at rock bottom. It's like you're trying to play all cool, and then I'm going to go home and this woman is going to read right through me, or this guy, he knows that I'm chatting, you know what I mean? But I think that helps, or it should help anyway. For me, it helps that self-awareness. Kind of like it's a mirror. You're gonna have this daily mirror that is going to hopefully challenge you to grow. So then it kind of, for me, is always, Maz, what do you want? What do you want for yourself? What do you want for you and Natalie? What do you want for your child and your friends and so forth? And I try to have those conversations with my wife as much as possible. And it's tough now because we've both got businesses and we've got a little one. And one thing I do miss is actually us having a lot of time to have those deep conversations. And we're carving out those moments, but because those are powerful, man. Like, just having someone that you can just sometimes just download your thoughts to. But yeah, that whole live your truth stuff. When she said that to me, it was almost like, and there's always things, sometimes I have a thinking about things worked out this way and my wife will have a totally different perspective on it. I'm like, oh gosh, you're right. It's good. You're kind of like the CCTV in my head that's like filming everything that I'm not seeing. I think that's beautiful. And sometimes, I mean, that's just, I have it in marriage. Some people have that through close friends or family members or twins or whatever. But I think that's super important to have because it helps you be truthful to yourself as much as possible.
One thing you mentioned earlier on was you were very risk averse, but now you're a husband, you're a father, now you're running your own company. So something's actually shifted in that whole.
Yeah.
When did that happen, and how did that happen?
There's so many things that chipped away at it. Obviously, I've got friends like yourself and a few of our friends. We've got mastermind groups. We share each other content. We, almost mentor each other, right? So that's been great. But also coming to the realization that if you do something long enough and it's not working, you have to just try something different. And there's actually just very interesting videos and I've always been lucky to have friends on the other extreme. So as much as I was risk averse, I had friends that were risk averse, and maybe some people that were in the middle. I had people on the other side who were just like risk. And what I looked at and I realized, actually, you know what? It doesn't really matter whether you're risk averse or whatever, because you can fail either way. You can fail, take risk and lose everything, or you can be risk averse and don't achieve don't achieve your thing. So for me, it was like, you got to slowly start moving into the other side, like the balance. I think balance is probably the best thing that I'm kind of looking for. I wouldn't say I'm now a risky person, but I always look at risk now as an opportunity to learn. Now, when this is something I picked up from my wife, she hates she doesn't like not trying, because like she'd rather just know the results, like one way or the other. And I admire that about her. But at the beginning, it was challenging for us, because for me, it was like, why didn't you think that through before you did it, right? But equally, as humans, we're strange creatures, because if that was a positive result, it'd be like, hey, well done, kind of thing, right? It's always when it's negative that we seem to judge our decision-making process. So that's something I've had to develop over the years, just being with my wife and kind of friends and stuff, to realize, actually, Maz, what if your way of thinking is actually what's holding you back? I think one thing I did, so I started doing a lot of experiments, right? So in terms of before I started my company, one of the experiments I did was I changed my LinkedIn bio to my ideal next career path. So I put in all of my accolades of everything that I had achieved from startup to thing. And the goal was to get at least 50 inquiries from recruiters. And what I did is literally, I knew CRM or data was like growing as a field. So I put in all my accolades, all the great things I was doing in my company and everything. And I had over 50 inquiries from recruiters. And for me, how did that help my risk aversity? Was that it proved to me that the market was in demand for my services. So worst case, if I left the company, I can always go to get another job. Obviously, by then I didn't know what COVID was going to come, but still, it's just a mental thing, right? Because what's risky to me isn't risky to the next person. The stuff now that I used to worry about, I look back and think, how? And there's people who, like, what I'm doing is not even risky at all, and I accept that. And I'm not arguing for anyone to be too far one way or the other, but just have conversations, ways or mental models, as they call it, to be able to challenge yourself when the results that you're getting isn't satisfactory.
So what are your mental models?
I think for me, when it comes to risk, for a lot of my mental models are linked to stories, right? So I'm always thinking about, what story am I telling myself? What if someone else who's on the other side of the fence laid down, I guess, their evidence against what I'm laying down? Who's right at the end of it? So I'll give you an example. So a friend of mine sent me a video years ago, which talked about, he said basically risk is subjective. Okay. So he said somebody who's in a job earning 50 grand a year probably thinks it's risky for them to leave that job because they have 50 grand worth of commitments or 50 grand worth of lifestyle, right? So they're potentially thinking of the worst, right? They're thinking, if I leave this job and try something and it doesn't work, I'm losing 50K worth of thing. It's too risky. Now, the downside is if they leave that job and try something different, the downside is between 49,099 down to 0. Okay, so that's the worst that can happen. They can earn 1p less than they're currently earning, or they can earn nothing if it's just a disaster. Okay, but the upside is 50K and 1p to a trillion, right? So like they could start the company tomorrow, and obviously this is greatly hypothetical, but like they could start a company tomorrow and be the next Jeff Bezos in the next 10, 15 years, right? But they're not even entertaining that because their risk is based on the 50K, because that's the lifestyle that they're living. And when I saw that video, I realized, gosh, that is so true. Because a lot of my decisions were kind of made on the fact that I'm trying to protect this lifestyle that I've built. But in fact, if I earned, and it's not about the money, but let's say if I earn double of what I'm earning and I'm doing something I love, then that creates a lot more security than me staying somewhere that maybe I loved it, but not as much as I love it if I earn double. But equally, what if I earn half of the 50K, if I earn 25K, but I enjoy it a lot more, and it means that I do such a great work that I'm growing at a faster rate than I would in a career. You know what I mean? So a lot of my mental models are kind of those kind of storytelling kind of ones. And that was an example that kind of helped trigger that. So now whenever I have to make a decision, I don't try to overthink it, but I always think when it's a tough decision to always have both sides of the fence. And then, but the key is action. You have to take action one way or the other. Either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. That's the anchor that makes you not have analysis paralysis. It's say, okay, I'm going to need to make this decision tomorrow by 12. Between now and 11:59, I'm going to do the debating one way or the other for Mr. Extreme and Mr. Not Extreme, right? But at 11:59, someone's got to win this debate. And for me, time boxing decisions helps. But then my mental models are generally about looking at the other side of the fence, especially when it comes around risk, is about thinking, is this a subjective view of risk of me based on my upbringing, based on what I know versus what the world knows, right? And then I try challenge that and then take action and then be comfortable with one way or the other.
As a father, a founder, how are you bringing up your daughter to deal with risk that you just talked about, entrepreneurship, and to develop a good level of self-awareness so she can lead herself?
She's pretty young. I hope, if she's interested in business in the future, that'll be great because she'll have good foundations. But if she isn't, I think I always try to focus on universal things that are consistent beyond business or sports or whatever. I think one thing I've learned from my experiences is making sure that she's loved. Once she knows, that's the most important thing, because then it means she can then make the right decision in terms of her own life, if she wants to go into business or not. As best as possible for me and my wife to be good examples of what it is to be a leader. What I mean by leader doesn't necessarily have to mean you have to lead people, just leading yourself, as we've talked about many times. It's like, why does Daddy get up in the morning and go for a jog every day? Well, he's trying to improve his mental, physical health, right? She probably doesn't understand that at this moment. She probably just think, oh, Daddy's going for a jog, Daddy's going for a walk. And she, like, whenever I'm going to the door, she's like, Daddy, you going for a walk? Kind of thing. But I know I'm going to have that conversation with her. So I'm just trying to show habits that are, and this is the thing, is you got to be very careful, because what I might think we positive habits may not necessarily be. So I'm trying to basically be showing habits that I can not justify, but I can explain to her why I'm doing it this way. Why does Daddy do this? And why does Mommy do this? I think the first thing we're just trying to do is just make sure that she knows that she's loved. That's the most important thing, because we do make a lot of our decisions based on that. Like, whether it's seeking validation from people outside of your family, seeking validation outside of yourself. That's something I wouldn't want for. I would want her just to feel first and foremost that she's got people that would love her, irrespective of whether she's a billionaire or not. That's one. Two is to have a comfortable relationship with failure and trying. Just try it. If it doesn't work, and I think she's getting that now. Well, try again. She'll be like, okay, can I try again? I'm like, yeah, try again. And that's the second one. And the third one, like what my wife said to me, is like, live your truth. That's the real freedom, is to feel like you can be, obviously, as much closest to 100% of yourself as possible. That is worth more than anything. It's like knowing that you accept yourself first and foremost as you are, and that hopefully, and that everyone around that loves you accepts you for who that is, it pretty much protects you from the 99.9% of the world not accepting you. Like, it doesn't really matter anymore because you're within yourself who you are, and the people that you love kind of know who you are and give you the space for you to explore that. I think those are the three things that I'm kind of keen to make sure that she develops over time. But then the rest is up to her. Like, whatever she wants to do, she'll know that she'll get the opportunity to do it and be supported, and irrespective of the results, she'll grow from it.
I love that. As we're coming towards the end, I need to ask you, hip-hop, you quote hip-hop lyrics on a regular.
Yes.
So, favorite lyric?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. Of all time.
Of all time? Why?
I don't think I can say one. I think there's so many. I think in the context of business, since this is kind of more business kind of oriented, there's so many. I can't even think of one. Gosh, that's a really good question. I've got loads, but I think for me, one of my favorite lyrics is when I was growing up was from Jay-Z on the song called Feeling It. And he said, if every person in your clique is rich, your clique is rugged, nobody will fall because everybody will be each other's crutches, right? And for me, that was so interesting because it talks about, obviously, group economics, talks about investing in others. And it's very much aligned to a lot of, I think, sort of African culture, like a lot of African diaspora culture around, it takes a village to raise a child, that kind of thing. So you almost have to invest in the village because that village will later look after your child if need be, right? So that was like my quote at uni for 30 years. If every person in your clique is rich, your clique is rugged. Nobody will focus, everybody will each other's crutches. And that's always been my view, rightly or wrongly, because sometimes you end up in a situation, and when rich, we're talking about money, obviously, but I think rich goes beyond money. It's just wealth. It's abundance, right? If you're abundantly happy and just abundantly have wisdom and you have so much more to give to others, when I lack, I can take some of that joy, I can take some of that wisdom, I can take some of that. And if it's financial, then yes, then I might have to ask you, Trophy, I need a little bit of change here because I'm struggling financially. So for me, rich is more than just money. So in that sense, is like you have to sow seeds into people so they can grow wealthy or rich in other aspects of life. You may need to encourage your friends during tough times so they can grow and be a happier person, because there's going to be a time when you have a downer. You may just need to call them and take some of that positive energy. So I would say that's probably my favorite lyric. And I think it covers beyond just business. It's kind of this thing where if everybody around you is rich or wealthy or abundant, then you can borrow from them. If everybody's cup is full, there will be no empty cup.
What does culture mean to you?
Interesting. I think for most people, obviously from the Black community, when we say culture, we mean Black culture, right? Culture in general, for me, I think it's just what the definition is in the dictionary, right? Customs, unspoken ways of doing things. Sometimes it can be close-knit communities, just kind of customs and things or ways of doing things from a particular group of people. And for me, why I knew the importance of culture is it kind of transcends time. There are certain things that I find very strange, like especially Black culture, using that as an example, right? I remember when I was young, this is a weird example to give, but I knew this from a very young age. There was a kid that I was kind of in school with, primary, there was infants, I think it might have been infants or primary, so I can't remember. And he was from Caribbean background. Obviously, I'm from Congo, so I'm African. And this is like early 90s, right? Or sort of early 90s. And we were in the playground playing, and he said to me, "Your mom," right? And this is going to sound very interesting, like very vile, and I was offended, right? But nobody else saw that as an insult. This is back in the 90s, right? Like, your mom, like, that's a cuss, right? Where we come from. He said, "Your mom," and I told the teacher, he said, "My mom." Like, I got into a fight with him, and I told the teacher, like, why did you? I got in trouble because I reacted to that. right? No one else except him and I and a few of the black kids knew that he had insulted me, right? And that always stuck in my head. And and this is how like introspective, like reflective I was even back then as a kid, right? Hold on. No one else saw that as an offense. Now, you say your mom to someone, doesn't matter what background you are. Like everybody knows that's like even Stormzy and was battling Wiley, and then it was in the Daily Mail that he said your mom. It becomes a thing now, right? But back then I always think, gosh, nobody actually knew. But for me, what's very interesting there is like, I've not sat down and really thought about it, is what is it between the relationship that black men particularly have, or black boys have with their mum, right? That becomes an insult, because for everybody else it just felt, oh, he just said your mum. That's not a cuss. And I still haven't. That's probably one of the things I think I would love to just figure out in life. Like, how could this way, like totally different culture technically, right? In these West Indian or Caribbean, and I'm from Congo, and I think we just only been in the country for 4 years or something, right? But that was an offense. And for me, that just, and then obviously as you grow, there's certain the foods and all of these different things, and there's just certain things that you do as particularly in the black culture that you just like hip hop. I'm a huge hip hop fan, right? Hip hop is from New York, but it resonates with me deeper than that. There's a certain thing, it just reminds me of certain parts of the music that we have in Congo. So for me, like, I just want to say culture transcends time and space. It's like there are certain nuances that you just have that there is some sort of connection. And I think with data now that we're working online and everything, the world's getting smaller. So something like your mum now is probably universally known in the West as an offensive term. That shows how closer as a community we're becoming, right? But also what it starts to show when I look at things like Afro beats, how it's kind of got a mixture of Jamaican, ragga, like all of this, even grime, all of this stuff. There's just a mixture of a melting pot of all these different cultures coming into one. It also shows the strength of, if we're speaking about black culture in terms of the African diaspora, right? And I'm sure other cultures have that experience. But for me, it's like the world is getting smaller because it's all connected. Language is getting smaller. Like people are being exposed to things that would have taken them years to get in a second. Something's trending in America, we know it within seconds, right? So the world's getting smaller. So then my company, literally, that's why we navigate in that space of culture, data, and storytelling, because it's then about how do we piece together all of these conversations that are happening in culture and in society with the data that we're seeing in terms of the behaviors on our websites, on our platforms, and with whatever the brand is trying to convey to those people, and making that as authentic as possible, right? Because right now you can't afford to get anything wrong as a brand, well, let alone as a personality, right? You can't afford to get, so you've got to have your ears out to the quote unquote streets, or to really understand what the sentiment is around your community or the culture that you serve. So yeah, for me, so to answer your question, I think culture is that kind of unspoken ways of doing things. And I always go back to that story in primary school. I would, to this day, it's mind-boggling. And there probably is a normal response for it, but that just triggered to me that there are certain nuances that we don't understand and certain links that we have as humans. And I think it's only going to get more interesting as we become more connected through the digital world.
And the last question, what do you want your legacy to be?
Very good question. I think I had the answer to this written somewhere, but you can see that it's probably not in the back of my mind. I think for me, I'll have to, let me just have a think so I'd say the right thing here. Yeah, I can't, to be honest, it's not something that's like regularly in the back of my mind, but I'm sure it's something I need to reflect on. But overall, I think I want to be somewhat known as somebody who gave more to the world than he took. That's just the general, what's it called? Premise, right? Like, I'd want people to say that my contribution was larger than life. And I think for me, I've always been, I've as much as I was like risk averse and stuff, I've always had an abundant mindset. I've always believed that anything's possible. I don't believe in in order for me to win, I have to steal from you. Like, I believe like I can create and we can co-create. And I want my life to be that example. I want the work I do to be something that enriches people. In fact, this is probably what I want my legacy is. You know the whole saying, like, everything you touch turn to gold? That's what I want my legacy to be. I want to be the person that they said everything I was involved in grew. Right? You don't want the reputation the other way around. Like, I don't think anyone does, right? So I'm willing to do whatever it takes to be that person, or more so that company. Because I think the company now is an extension of myself. So it's not just about my ego or whatever, but it's more about taking what I believe is my God-given gift, is to help and help things grow. And finding similar people who have that same vision, who, when they work on something, it blossoms. So to answer your question, it's essentially those two things, kind of somewhere in between. Everything you touch kind of turns to gold kind of analogy, saying, but also somebody that paid back more than he took in from life.
And on that note, I'm just going to say that I've known Maz for 20 years, like, wow, we're old. But he's constantly someone that always gives back. Even from my friendship circles to the D2C group we haven't talked about, which is 100 plus founders, and he's been giving a lot of value to so much that he does in the community, in the culture. You're already doing that. That legacy is already being lived, and he's someone that's known as the person to come to for help, for guidance, for nurturing. Mm-hmm. So keep on doing that. Keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you. And equally, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. And I guess the same goes for you. And I'm really proud to see this podcast. And I know you've had a few people on this, and it's a good initiative. And I'll keep an ear out for new episodes.
This is Everyday Leadership. Well, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Everyday Leadership. You can check out the show notes on www.mindsetshift.co.uk/podcast, where you can find out more about my guests and how you can contact them. You can listen to old episodes, or if you have a question about this episode or any other episodes, you can just press a button and ask me that question, and I'll answer it on the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, share this podcast with someone else. We'll see you next time on Everyday Leadership.